Welcome to Wiki Africa Hour, where Africa's Wikimedians talk to, learn from, and discuss with each other topics they choose. Each session is curated by African Wikimedians to expand Africa's open movement. Today's host is Ceslas Obanyaya.
Hello, friends of Open Knowledge. Welcome to the 11th episode of Wiki Africa Hour, titled Podcasting Wikipedia Women, which is in fact specially dedicated to celebrate International Women's Rights Month through shining light on the beautiful podcast initiatives handled by Wiki Women. I'm your host, Ceslas Obanyaya. We have an amazing program up ahead, but before we get into that, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the devastating events in Ukraine. Today marks the 1 month anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. As Wikimedians, we want to express our solidarity with and concern for our Ukrainian, Russian, and Eastern European community members. This aggression not only affects our movements and our colleagues, but puts a blinding spotlight on the importance of what we are all trying to achieve: freedom of speech and the rights for all people to freely access unbiased, neutral knowledge. Now, on to back to the program where we celebrate women and their voices. When you hear the mantra hashtag break the bias, it's not just a hashtag, it's a call to action for everyone to come together and stop sidelining our female colleagues and their achievements, to make it a culture to give our female colleagues the same equal opportunities men take for granted. It is to celebrate our female colleagues as much as we do the men. Like the good book says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. Humanity will never achieve its full potential if half of its population is ignored, belittled, or subjugated. We need to indeed break the bias. Part of breaking the bias is about bringing women into the limelight alongside their male counterparts. To celebrate International Women's Rights Month, we have invited some very special and amazing women who are behind some very interesting podcast initiatives. Please welcome our special guests in the persons of Betty Kankam Baudu from the Wiki Loves Women Inspiring Open podcast. There is also Yolanda Pensa from Scuola the Pensiero podcast. And there is Rebecca O'Neill from The World According to Wikipedia podcast. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you for really making our time to be here with us. We would like to move forward to having you address some very intriguing questions, if I would say. Welcome once again. Let's start with introductions. Starting with you, Betty. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. So my name again is Betty Kankambwedu. I'm a journalist and media advocate based in Ghana. Currently, I'm the host of Wiki Loves Women Inspiring Open podcast. I'm also the co-founder of the Ghana Women Expect project. It is an initiative aimed at preventing the elimination of women expect voices in news media. And I've also worked in the communications field, providing communication support for some non-governmental organizations.
Thank you, Betty. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Rebecca O'Neill, and I am the project coordinator for Wikimedia Community Ireland, the user group for the Republic of Ireland. I've been a Wikipedia editor since around 2011 and involved in the movement since about 2014. As you mentioned, I'm a co-host of the World According to Wikipedia podcast with my partner in crime, Fionnuala Murphy. And I am interested in all things gender balance, but also anything with a little bit of an Irish flavour on any Wikimedia project. You'll attract my attention.
Thank you, Rebecca. And to you, Yolanda.
Hello, Yolanda Pensa. I'm a Wikipedian since 2006, interested in contemporary African art, which is my specialty in research and my job. I work in university, but I'm very active as a volunteer. I'm the president of Wikimedia Italy, and I've been very active on Wiki Africa project. So aiming really to make sure that Wiki Africa involve institutions all over the world. I've been working on a podcast in a collaboration with a radio called Usma Radio, and Scuola di Pensiero, School of Thought, is my podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those introductions. And then coming to you, Rebecca, the world according to Wikipedia is quite a name. How did you conceive this podcast? What are you hoping it will achieve?
So it was really aimed at non-Wikimedians. So we're part of a podcast network here in Ireland called the Head Stuff Podcast Network, and it was a podcaster that I've gotten to know in the Irish community called Derek O'Shea. He used to run a podcast there called Mother Folklore, which was about Irish language. He had written 2 books about rediscovering the Irish language. So he said to me, he said, "Look, I think you really need to have a podcast about the work that you do on Wikipedia." So myself and Fanula had a podcast previously many years ago. We were both involved in the skeptical movement, so kind of science and science communication. So when Derek mentioned it to me, I said, "Fanula, would you be interested?" And so she's kind of my foil. She's done a little bit of editing, but not much. So I explain kind of the weird, strange little world that us Wikipedians live in with our little acronyms and funny little ways that we do things. And it was to try and just communicate to people that it isn't this kind of strange monolith. You know, Wikipedia isn't this impenetrable, faceless thing, that it's just made up of humans. And sometimes we get things amazingly right. Sometimes we get things a little bit wrong. But we're always trying to do our best and try to communicate that to the wider world.
Thank you, Rebecca, for having those outside the Wiki movement at heart, because it could, like you said, sound very strange to them when you are explaining, let's say, some Wiki-related acronyms. They are lucky to have you and the podcast, The World According to Wikipedia. And Yolanda, Scuola di Pensiero, or School of Thought, like it's called in English. It's a very deep title, I must say. What made you choose that as a name, and what is the key focus of the podcast?
I've been working for many years as a journalist, so I was going around the world doing interviews, and it's something that I love. I love to interview people, to meet them. I'm an anthropologist as a training, and the fact of documenting voices is something that really interests me. So on one side, I wanted a research tool. I wanted something that allowed me to have an excuse to meet people and to interview them. And on the other hand, I wanted to investigate how people change the world. So School of Thought is very well known, the Frankfurt School of Thought. In philosophy, you have a lot of thinkers, intellectuals that created the School of Thought. So they created ideology and they try to influence the way people see the world, and they construct it. And I was interested in how different people invest energy to change the world. So it can be creating a journal, a magazine, an institution, but also it can be people that are influential within movements. So my interview are people that work in institutions all over the world. You will have people at the African Museum of the Smithsonian Institute. You have an institution from South Africa. You have intellectual like Achille Mbembe, that is very well known from South Africa and Cameroon. You have also activists in the movement. So you have also people from the Wikimedia movement. In particular, in the last year, I documented some of the Italian protagonists of Wikipedia, because I thought it was a way to also tell the story of the community of Wikipedia in Italian.
That's beautiful. I mean, learning that there is a philosophical approach to making the podcast come to light. It's really something interesting. I perhaps learned that from you to add some more to my knowledge. And and Betty, you are in a different position compared to Yolanda and Rebecca. I mean, they both created their own podcasts as passion projects, if I would say. But in your case, can you explain how the Inspiring Open podcast was born and how you came to become its host?
Okay, so Inspiring Open is a Wiki Loves Women initiative. I like to say it's the baby of Isla and Florence. And basically, the whole idea is to spotlight women whose work intersect with the open movement and basically speak to courageous and tenacious women whose work focuses on building community. And of course, these women know what it means, to build community, what it means to share. So, like I said, the whole idea is from Isla and Florence, and they put out a call for people to apply to be hosts, and I applied, went through the interviewing process, and eventually became the host of the project. But personally, I see myself as a good fit because my entire career as a journalist, I've been working to push the voices of women. So if you look at my portfolio, I cover a lot of women's stories related to women. I also actually ran an initiative with my co-founder. And basically what we're doing is to center the voices of women experts in the Ghanaian media. We had a survey and the results were that the media was not speaking to women experts at all. So we've made it our mission to, balance the scale in this sense. So, and in as much as Inspiring Open, looks to spotlight these women in Africa or who have connections, to the continent and the work they're doing, and how open has just been like a phenomenal way for their work to go further. I guess Isla and Florence saw me as the best fit for this project. So it's a new project, but I think you should really take an interest because the interviews we've had are just phenomenal.
Thank you so much. In essence, it's safe to say your previous experience sort of helped you to be the tailored fit to host
Yes.
this very interesting podcast.
Yes, and maybe I should mention this. My background really is a broadcast journalist. So I'm a broadcast journalist, with
Oh,
some years of experience, hosting news shows and all that. So that's my background. So yeah.
okay. That's like hitting the nail on the head for us to specify the aspects of journalism you are into.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Betty. And Rebecca, in the spirit of International Women's Rights Month and theme breaking the bias, what advice can you give to your younger self and the society at large? Rebecca, you can answer first, then followed by Yolanda and then Betty.
That's an interesting one because I'm a product. I went to university in the early 2000s, and kind of on the back of girl power and Spice Girls, and that we had won all the gender stuff, that we didn't have to worry about it. We could go to university, we could get any job we wanted. All the barriers had been broken down, and as you get older, you start to realize that maybe it isn't as straightforward as that. Like when I was in university, women's rights officers were being abolished as as officerships, because we were like, no, we've it's equality now, it's gender rights, it's gender rights is in the past, third rate feminism, that's all done. So I think maybe exposing a younger version of myself to some feminist thought earlier on is something that I would definitely, there's a few books that I'd pass to her, I'd tell her, these, not everything is as straightforward as you think it is. There's still biases, there's still issues. Also, Wikipedia was very, very new at that point. So my conception of being able to engage in a big knowledge project like that, I was an art student. I didn't think that I was going to, engage in something so kind of wordy in my future. But I suppose to say that I'd probably try, and it's one of the things that I do in kind of other work that I do, is try to empower younger people in general to be more kind of aware of the power that they have, to use their privilege, specifically in Ireland, to, when we have access to, most of us have access to good quality Wi-Fi. We have, access to devices in schools or universities, institutional libraries, all that sort of thing. And how powerful that is, and how you can use that set of tools, that set of privileges that you've been given to improve knowledge access and representation, and that's one of my favorite things about working with university students, is actually just kind of getting them to kind of think about how powerful they can be as individuals editing Wikipedia, and sometimes hearing that back in feedback and things like that is wonderful. So I suppose, thinking about, I think it was the woman who set up the Body Shop, she used to say about, the power of one person, they're like, how much can one person do? It's like, well, the power of an individual, just think about being trapped in a small tent with one mosquito. You become very aware of one person. So one individual can make a lot of changes, and can, elicit a lot of change and have a lot of power, depending on where they choose to leverage it. So I suppose I'd like to talk to my younger self a little bit more like that. I could have, be even further along at this point, but what can you do?
Well, you are hale and healthy, so it's not late. I mean, you can always yeah, continue from where your younger self would have maybe started from. And over to you, Yolanda. Please.
Well, I think it is a good chance to reflect about how we portray people. Obviously, in my work also of recordings, I talk to a lot of women and men. And obviously what you obtain is just a fragment of their life. You get a portrait that is very partial. You get a simple note. I think that is why people hate themselves on Wikipedia. Their Wikipedia article about biography is very often what people dislike at all. They aim to have an article on Wikipedia, and then when they get it, they really hate it, because it just show a little part of yourself, and it's not your narrative. You cannot control it. So it's really a strange portrait. And I think what we need to learn is also how to portray complexity, how we can actually enrich things with a broader look. And bias is, of course, a simplification. So it's always a way of looking at things in a very narrow way. So I think if I have to look back and maybe also look forward, I would try to focus on the way we portray ourselves in a more complex way, and we portray the world in a more complex way. And this is extremely difficult. And we need the effort of a lot of people and combining those efforts.
Yes, I can relate to the collective efforts of everyone, helping to perhaps make things better over time. And to you, Betty, how would you address that question?
I would say that maybe this is what I'll tell my younger self, that like the difference I bring on board should be valued and celebrated. Because when you're young, sometimes there are like a lot of insecurities, some justified, some probably not so justified, but you feel that the difference you bring on board, it's not like you feel there isn't power in the fact that you are different. There isn't power in the fact that you don't conform to the norm. So, and for me, even as an adult, what I've learned is that it's okay not to conform sometimes, and even most of the times. Because if we're thinking of breaking the bias, what it means is that the differences everybody brings on board should be celebrated. So the differences women bring on board should be celebrated. The different opinion women bring to this world should be celebrated. So yeah, I think I would have valued, the difference I bring on board more, and I would have probably encouraged it more to be celebrated.
Wow, Betty, you just took this up a notch because yes, I just had to give it to you. You took the response up a notch, and that has really given us a deeper insights towards what a younger person could have done differently or could have known better before maybe getting into adulthood. Thank you so much, Betty, for that response. And Inspiring Open celebrates women who work and whose work and personal ethics intersect with the open movement. Betty, how were the guests for the Inspiring Open podcast profiled? What boxes did they have to tick to be selected?
Okay, so first of all, there was the profiling of the guest was very open. As the podcast stands for, we kind of opened it wide enough for people to, nominate people who are worth the profile, I guess, of what we're expecting. So we looked at, first of all, women whose work definitely intersects with the open movement. And even there were women whose work intersected with the open movement, but they did not even realize it. We looked at women whose work is focused on building community, supporting community, women who are keen on, trying to make sure that, trying to be the voice for the marginalized, and basically women who have really gone against all the odds to be where they are today. And when you listen to the stories of these women, you can tell that is what they stand for. They've really been through the mill, and whatever it is that they are talking about, they know what they are talking about. They know their subject matters. They've lived long enough to experience the world, in the eyes of a woman. And some of the advice and the nuggets they drop are so profound. So yes, we're looking for women whose work obviously intersected with the open movement, women who are very successful in their chosen career fields, women who've lived life and can really share, and of course, women whose entire life just inspire others. So that is what we're going for. And I'm happy to say that the first 16 women we've spoken to for season 1 really stand for those things we were looking for.
Wow. Betsy, thank you so much for letting us know the nominations were kept open. That's one. And then what I just discovered to be more amazing about this Inspiring Open podcast is the fact that some of these women are already, playing roles that are positively contributing to open movement without knowing.
Yeah.
Imagine when they find out, they will be
Yeah.
totally blown away.
Yes.
that's
Some of them
that's
were totally blown
interesting.
away. Yeah.
Oh, as if I knew. That's very interesting. That guys, you just have to look out for this podcast. I mean, this new revelation about it, it's really intriguing. It's really intriguing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Betty. And Ilana, coming to you, looking at the various topics covered so far by Scuola di Pensiero, uh, they cut across both Italian and the English language. Your podcast features 34 episodes. How do you go about choosing your guests and what is discussed for each episode?
Yes, there are at the moment around 55 episodes, and also some in French, since it's one of the language I can also speak. And what actually characterize every portrait is that it is not an interview. It is just the voice of a person talking about its project or what is the main issues that they're working on. It can be an institution, it can be a vision, an activity, and then they explain why it is important and why they're doing it. What is the reason why it is important for them? And there are, as I was mentioning, the latest interviews, the latest presentations come from the Italian community. And among some of the most active members since the beginning, actually, of Wikipedia in Italian, we find very strong women. Frida Brioschi, Erika Litrenta, CV, Giulia Clonfero. We're talking about women that have been really driving the community and really engaging in a very active way. And also they had an international role, some of them. Then we have interviews that I did during Wikimania, which is a fantastic chance to meet many members of the international community. So we have a broader number of interviews also with Mark Ram from Internet Archive. There are some of the active members of the community. Just to mention some of the women, Delphine Menard, also Florence Devoir is also among some of the most active members of the international community, of course. And also I did interviews, in particular in the art field. So during the Dakar Biennale of Contemporary African Art, which is an event that I've been following since '98, it is a fantastic venue to meet a lot of the international representative of cultural institutions focusing on Africa. And we have Salah Hassan, who is a major curator. We have Karen Milburn, who is another curator from the Smithsonian Institute, and many others. And also some of the interview come from Douala Art, the Sud Salon Urbain de Douala, which is an event in Cameroon, which is also an international event, and it features many artists that from Cameroon, but also from the continent, the African continent, and Europe and the United States. So it is quite a broad spectrum of people, and the leitmotif, the element that combines all the interview is really trying to get the sense of where they want to bring the world, why they're working on that direction, and how they would like the world to change.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's really broad, like you rightly said. And in all these, I can't help but notice that you seek out very interesting subjects and people from different locations at the slightest opportunity you get to bring them on the podcast. And that must almost always keep you on your toes, always looking out for the right scoop or what have you to have featured on the podcast. Interesting knowing that a great deal from Africa is also represented. And I, for one, wasn't even at the 2019 Wikimedia, but listening to Florence's interview sort of gave me a hint of what went down. Thank you so much, Landa, once again. We sincerely appreciate that. And moving to the next question, Wiki Africa Hour was the world, according to Wikipedia, Hero of the Week on the first week of June 2021. And we are honored you recognized us, Rebecca. And that same week, the world, according to Wikipedia, covered the topic, What Have We Got in Common? A very funky title, if I must say. How do you profile what topics to feature on the podcast?
So there's a few different, I suppose, motifs that have appeared. Some of it is, I suppose, chronological. So we had Joy when we had an episode during February 2021 for Wiki Loves Folklore, because she was the coordinator for that. We had Anastasia from Wikimedia Ukraine when it was Wiki Loves Earth, when it was a May-June, I think, episode. So some of it, I suppose, I tie because being embedded in the movement, there are certain months of the year that are, September for me is always Wiki Loves Monuments. So some of it is as things unfold, the beats that we are aware of. And then others are, so you were launching the Africa Hour. So I was like, well, I have to spotlight that. And, myself and Fanula have always been very aware that, we don't want to center very European or very, quote unquote, Western voices the entire time, that, the Wikimedia movement is is far more diverse than that, even if the little bubbles that we exist in don't feel that way. And it's something that, I've always been, increasingly, as I've spent more and more time in the movement. And one of the things that's happened, I think, since the pandemic, when we've had to do the virtual pivot, and have our conferences and have our meetups, and the ability for people from parts of the world that traditionally wouldn't have been able to, say, travel to Berlin or wherever we were having our big conferences, actually being able to not only participate in these conversations but lead them. And when I was looking around every week when we were, I'd done my podcast, when you'd done my interview and we were drawing together the bits and pieces, we'd write up our little script. I would look around at all the different Facebook groups, the Wikipedia Facebook groups that I'm a member of, or what's going up on my Twitter feed, or what's going around on the email lists at the moment, and try and pick something that represents possibly something that somebody who doesn't edit Wikipedia would go, I didn't think that there would be representation from that part of the world, or that there's interest in open society, or that there's now a Dagbani Wikipedia. So trying to just, I suppose, use little bits of news and little bits of things that the movement get excited about, and try and communicate that to the quote, the lay community, the non-editing, the non-wiki community out there. So the things that I get excited about, and try and relay that excitement to the rest of the world.
I must say that your excitement instincts, they are, they are quite right, as they have produced awesome results ranging from the first episode to what you have to date. And I, for one, especially love the fact that it's not centralized, European centralized, like you mentioned, and the rest of the Wikisphere, let's say Africa and what have you, they also get to be represented. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Uh, Coming over to you, Betty. The Inspiring Open, as a name, it could have featured any gender. Why is it very important for the podcast to focus on female guests? Are you targeting a particular audience? Please explain.
Well, first of all, I guess, it's Inspiring Open. It's a project by Wiki Loves Women. So if it's from Wiki Loves Women, obviously it's going to be women centered. But also, I think there's this, we're hoping to address a bigger problem, which is that some way, somehow, women are not celebrated, as much as they should be. And sometimes it's almost as if there is like a deliberate attempt to kind of silence women. And here we are, we have amazing women doing amazing things in the world. And we live in a culture where, there are attempts to silence us. And if there's this platform that can amplify the voices of these women who, as I mentioned earlier, have been through all the odds and still survived, and have seen how important it is to open up their work to even have a bigger impact, why not do that? So, yes, maybe we could have featured men, but it is a Wiki Loves Women project, and we want to, amplify the voices of women as much as possible, because really, we are the ones whose voice, are being suppressed. So, yeah, that's that's. I just feel it fits the name.
And you are not far from the truth. I listened to the episode one uh, with Annie, and coming from Nigeria, she made very relatable remarks.
Yeah.
And it's nice to see such a person, or listen to such a person tell her story and inspire the girl child in Nigeria that in fact a woman could be a tech guru and
Yeah.
run things both locally and on the global stage. Thank you so much for having women at heart, especially for this podcast. Um, Scuola di pensiero is documented under Creative Commons license. Yolanda, why is releasing your podcast under a CC license important to you?
Well, everything that I produce has a CC by SA license, so it is quite easy to pick the right one. But in general, I also negotiate with the radio station to use this license, and also since it's a radio station, it's quite a strange project because Usma Radio is the radio station of the University of San Marino, which is an independent state, is a republic of San Marino. And I wanted the radio station, so I actually encouraged all the production to be open. And it is true that the fact of being a university radio create a specific position. Now all universities are moving to open science. So the idea is that what you produce in university should be accessible, open, released with open licenses. So there is an attention towards the same mission and the same concept of open knowledge that we have as a movement. On the other hand, it was interesting to trigger a radio from San Marino because they're very independent in actually selecting and the copyright and managing also the rights from all the audio. So it was an interesting combination. And furthermore, to me, what it was interesting is to create a series of portraits in which protagonists speak by themselves, so there is no interview. And this is a format that is very suitable for Wikipedia. So some of the audio have been already added to Wikipedia article because the format makes it feasible. So you have the voice of a protagonist that talks about an institution, a project, a vision, or it's his or her work. And the license makes it compatible. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able, obviously, to upload it on Wikipedia and to add it to Wikipedia.
That's quite interesting. I could only but imagine the kind of work you put into convincing a radio station who perhaps came to light for their own goals to have these published under the CC license. It must have been quite a hard work convincing them. And then
I'm a
coming
very convincing chick, actually.
Okay. Okay.
It's like extremely insisting.
Yes, they would think, oh, who is this person? What's she saying? But in the end, you did it, and the fact that they agreed to let these episodes be published under CC license, that's really interesting, and it makes the work quite accessible and much more reusable. Thank you so much, Yolanda. Rebecca, the world, according to Wikipedia, has a mantra: lifting the lead on the weird and wonderful world of Wikipedia. Your podcast has been live since November 2020 with 20 episodes, if my memory serves me right. With this experience, Rebecca, what are the most common misconceptions you find people have about Wikipedia?
It's an interesting one because I think it depends on your age. I think people who were adults or teenagers when Wikipedia became a thing have a lot of the kind of the tired tropes that we think of it's not reliable, anybody can edit it, it's all probably Americans, white guys in basements, feverishly at their keyboards, and we probably shouldn't pay attention to it. And they are teachers and educators, and sometimes impart that to students. What I found with people who are perhaps, I suppose, Gen Z, as they're being referred to, that were children or are younger than Wikipedia even now, they seem to think of it, especially English language Wikipedia, as something that is finished or almost finished, and that there isn't a way in for them to edit it. And because they didn't grow up perhaps with an internet that was more hackable. When I started using the internet, it was GeoCities and the early stages of MySpace and things like that, where everything was quite kind of do it yourself. And young people now who are 20 or younger, the internet isn't do it yourself in the same way as it used to be. Things kind of come prepackaged, and GIFs are already there in your comments. You don't have to figure out how to embed something. So not thinking of websites as something you just visit passively, I think, is far more natural to them. So and I think that I think there's this kind of a generational shift there as to how people interact with the internet and things that kind of exist, kind of as we kind of think of Wikipedia as kind of a pillar of the internet, and perhaps a little bit of a hangover from the old internet, the old web. This kind of read write interactive iteration, as opposed to something that is dominated by big media companies, and they just scoop up your content and try and monetize you as much as possible. So I suppose it speaks to it opens younger people's minds to the idea of what the web could be. If we go back to the idea of the commons and kind of doing things for the greater good, as opposed to trying to be entrepreneurial and make money out of things that you do on the web, that actually passion projects and things that you do for the love of it can also translate into things that people can benefit from in the wider world. So yeah, those are the two major misconceptions that I would come across, and part of the idea behind the internet was to speak to those two common threads, kind of saying, actually, there's quite a lot of robust work that goes into a lot of the things that you do see on Wikipedia, but at the same time, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need people from all over the world, from all sorts of backgrounds, with all sorts of points of view, to contribute to it, to make it as unbiased and representative and whole of the human experience as possible. Just small goals, nothing particularly lofty or big.
That's interesting. Talking about perhaps age factor being one of the reasons for the various misconceptions on the Wikisphere. But it's actually good that we have platforms like these very podcasts, The World According to Wikipedia, helping to educate people better, for them to actually understand the concept of wiki, talk about decentralizing the web, talk about wiki space being a work in progress. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that digestive response. And this goes to Yolanda and Rebecca. Before you both launched your respective podcasts, you probably had things planned out the way you would like them to go. Uh, what aims do you seek to achieve, or do you seek to achieve, and how have these goals changed over time? Yolanda, you might go first.
Well, I didn't expect to make so many interviews and meeting. I discovered that it was an excellent excuse. I've been working on writing most of my life, so writing articles, essay, and discovering the audio has been quite magical. Also discovering how you can influence audio. So the way you talk to people, if you're smiling, you can actually hear people smiling, even if you don't see them. And I also noticed how you can trigger an approach, an enthusiasm, or moving towards a certain content. So it was really a discovery, not only the chance of talking to people and making interviews and meetings, but also to play with the audio, which is extremely powerful. Also, it is fascinating how you can edit audio. It is also something that is magical. You can really reinforce the capacity of people of talking, and you can obviously shrink sometimes content because you need to not have 2 hours of interview. So it is a very interesting tool and a very powerful one. And I think it is less. It takes less space than video. So having a video interview like we're having now, it's more challenging. It puts people into a much bigger pressure. And the audio has a very, it creates really different possibilities. And I love that part. And I think I didn't expect it to be so capable of changing my perspective also on my role. So I cannot write, so I cannot be the author of something, but I can facilitate or support something that comes out of other people.
That's cool. Yeah, personally, some people could be camera shy, but you find them very expressive when they are just being recorded via audio. And I could agree that, being behind this podcast could have revealed to you much more philosophical aspect of people and humans. Thank you so much. And over to you, Rebecca.
I think the main thing that surprised me that I didn't expect was how many Wikipedians and Wikimedians would actually listen. I thought that they would find it really kind of just a bit kind of obvious that they'd be like, yeah, I know how Wikipedia works. I don't need to listen to interviews from people that I've met at conferences and people that I know and I'm friends with on Facebook. But actually, they've really rode in behind it, and they're some of the most avid listeners. And I think Jan and a few other people who's been on the podcast and is watching now, they have been, I suppose, our biggest fans. And from the podcast network's point of view, they're like, your demographics are far more diverse than a lot, because a lot of the other podcasts on the Head Stuff podcast network are quite Irish, and so an awful lot of listenership from Ireland, but also say from the United States, because there tends to be quite a lot of interest in Irish content from diaspora. So you get a little bit from Australia and, places where a lot of Irish people have ended up. But we have a far more diverse listenership, and it's only when I said to one of the guys, Paddy, in there, I was like, yeah, no, that's Wikipedians. They have found it and they've been sharing it with their Wikimedian friends. So that's quite satisfying, I think, because it shows that I think sometimes we worry that Wikimedians, the ones that are quite entrenched in the community or quite kind of at the, I suppose, the coal face of editing, that perhaps we're not as curious as we should be about what other Wikimedians are doing. But I think the fact that people are so interested in this podcast and are curious about it and like chatting about it and give me suggestions and send me links to people that they think I should talk to, I think shows that we actually are curious and we are still excited about the movement. And giving people another outlet is very satisfying for me. I thought after a while I would start to struggle to find people. I thought my network would kind of run dry quite quickly, but that has not been the case. And even with the pandemic, I've been connecting with more and more people through, initiatives like this and other networks that have developed. So much like we all know that the separate Wikipedias, all the language Wikipedias, there's never going to be an endpoint to them. I think a podcast like this, much like with Alonda's, it could just keep going because there's always something new to learn, and there's always somebody new, interesting who you hadn't heard of before, or who's just coming up and kind of surfaced, and somebody introduces you or you become aware of their work. So that's quite satisfying all around. So it's a lovely outcome.
That's actually truth. I mean, permit me to say that there is no such thing as too much information when it comes to having tips or news about Wikipedia. From this side of things, sometimes you find somebody who has been in Wiki for donkey years asking you some very, very strange question, and you'll be like, but I just got here. I just got here in 2018. You were here way, 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 way back. And you shouldn't be asking me this, but that doesn't put me up because like you have found out there is no end to learning stuff about Wiki, even for Wikimedians and those who are active editors too. So please keep it going, keep it going. The knowledge you're sharing is endless. Every day we have new people discovering Wikipedia for the good it's really doing. Such people, they surely would need a podcast like that, let's say, to learn the ropes to kick off their journey in the Wiki movement. Thank you so much, Betty, for once again throwing light to your experience. And I would like to ask, what advice would you give about developing content or approaches towards creating a podcast? Talk about favorite tools, tips, and tricks. Betty, you can answer first, then followed by Rebecca and Yolanda.
Okay. I would say, well, first of all, you need to know that you get better when you keep doing it. It gets better when you keep doing it. I know when you start, you can get the jitters sometimes. And even when you have your first guest, your mind runs wild. And even if you have to do all the talking on the podcast, you sometimes you feel like your thoughts are not sequenced. But I just want to assure you that it gets better with time. It takes time to build rapport. It takes time to build the fluency. It takes time to get comfortable, and that's fine. Don't give up when you're messing up. Keep going. It gets better with time. With regards to tools, I really don't have a favorite, but I like to use Zoom, for recordings because um, it's very easy for a lot of people, and I don't like to stress my guests, with tech and all that. So we keep it simple here. We normally limit it to Zoom as the platform where we do the interviews. My favorite editing software is Adobe Audition. I'm sure a lot of people can relate. Yeah, so those are the tools that I can say. But again, there are a host of others out there, in the open, where you can access and learn. When you go on YouTube, for instance, there are a lot of how-tos, how to start a podcast, which is the best tool to use. There are a lot of how-tos that you need to take advantage of as well. So yeah, I guess that would be the tips that I have. But for me, the most important one is it gets better with time. So keep going, don't stop. Once you have something to say, once you have a topic to address, once you identify that need, keep going, keep talking to people, keep putting your opinions out there. It gets better with time.
Thank you, Betty. I, for one, could relate to that very sentence. It gets better with time. My Wiki in Africa team, they know, they know the story when we ran our first episode of Wiki Africa Hour. But months later, 6 months, 8 months, and now we're in 2022. The story is way different, and I can assure you, yes, practice makes perfect, and it gets better with time. Over to you, Yolanda.
Well, I think I will advocate for open tools, so open software tools. You can use maybe Jitsi, which is an alternative to Zoom, Google Meet. So Jitsi is free software, and also which is also you find online quite easily, and it allows you to do a recording if you want to use the internet. Otherwise, I think actually a good physical recorder is something that makes you really look cool. So I don't know, even if you can do actually the job with a mobile phone, probably. And just to come to tools for the editing, Audacity is an interesting alternative for editing audio, and it is also this one open and free software. So maybe those could be hints and alternatives that are more close to the Wikimedia movement.
Okay, thank you for recommending the Jitsi open software as one that could be helpful and used. And over to you, Rebecca.
I do have to say, my piece of advice is find a partner in crime, somebody who's good at that stuff, which is what I've done with Fanula. Because I've got Fanula, you know about these things. So I do I suppose what she sees is the slightly harder bit, which is finding people to talk to and thinking of things to ask them, and doing that, I suppose, that inquiry piece. And I just give her the files and she chops them and takes out all of my ums and ahs and long pauses that I have when I'm trying to formulate a question in my head. So I know we've used Audacity in the past. I know that Fanula tends to use Adobe as well these days. She finds it, and again, it's an investment. So what I would say to people is that what you will find is in your location, you never know who might partner with you. So we have it's an Irish podcast network. So there could be one, like a nascent or an upcoming podcast network or podcast group within your city, your country, your language group. So have a look around and see who's creating podcasts, even just kind of locally to you, or in adjacent topics, and see what they're up to. A lot of podcasters are very generous in lending their time and their expertise, and are really excited to speak to people who are thinking about going on, I suppose, the podcast journey, or interested in engaging in those kind of things. So I found generally, if you are interested in how somebody produces their content, especially if it's somebody, say, local to you, or it's a highly specialized podcast and it might be slightly more niche. If you reach out to them and say, look, I'm a really big fan of the work that you do, and I'm thinking about doing something similar, there's no harm in asking and seeing how they actually put things together and how they think about it. One of the things that quite surprised me from previous podcasting experience, myself and Fanuli used to do it freeform when we had our previous one, so we wouldn't have any script or anything. We'd have some talking points, but this one we've actually gone more scripted, which has helped with the editing process. So Fanula doesn't have as much, I suppose, fat to trim. It's much easier to put an episode together because she knows what's coming. But also it takes a little bit of the pressure off because you don't have to feel like you're so snappy in the moment. And I do that with my interviewees as well. I prepare the questions ahead of time and I share them, much like Celise did with us, so that you know what's happening, and it takes away a little bit of that nerves. And it also means that, hey, look, if there's something I've missed out on that you really want to talk about, put in a question, give me a prompt, and we'll talk about it. So I think, putting in a little bit of that preparation and kind of coming up with a workflow that works for you while borrowing and stealing from other people is always a good, somebody else has already built the wheel. There's no need to create your own.
Interesting point. I specifically could relate to finding a partner or a goon to ride shotgun while you shoulder the responsibilities, because it could maybe at a point get overwhelming for one person. So finding somebody to collaborate with could perhaps make things a bit more easier. Thank you for those tips and answers. And for someone who wishes to tune in and listen, is there a schedule for the releases of your podcast episodes? Betty, Yolanda, and Rebecca. Betty, you first.
Yeah. Yes, there's a schedule. So the first episode is out already. And you've mentioned that Annie talks about, her personal journey, her entrepreneurial journey, and then her 9-to-5 job, and why she thinks it's very important to keep your 9-to-5 job when you want to, launch into the entrepreneurial space. And she gives a lot of, insightful things. It's up. Our episodes are up bi-weekly. So what it means is that on Monday, the second episode will be out. So every 2 weeks, we release an episode. And like I already said, you don't really want to miss out on these conversations.
Awesome. Thank you for that update and letting us know when we can catch up on the forthcoming episodes. How about you, Yolanda?
Well, I'm always on late, so I actually have 8 episodes that were supposed to come out in 2021. So I would say that there's a permanent delay. But Tri Charlie, who is an active Wikipedia contributor in Italy, will be the next one. And I'd like also to do some editing on some interview I did to Leila Zia and Victor Grigas. Victor, in particular, is a very interesting volunteers and staff member of the Wikimedia Foundation, a very active volunteer that interviewed around 600 Wikipedians. So you find a lot of his videos online. And he's an interesting contributor with a great sense of humor. So hopefully it's going to be one of the next podcasts.
Okay, please do let us know whenever the next and the future episodes drop, so we can keep tabs on those also. How about you, Rebecca? Is there a schedule?
So we had planned to start our third season by now, but unfortunately COVID and a bunch of other things decided otherwise. But I have reached out to, the wonderful thing about the Wikimedian of the Year is not only celebrating all of our amazing Wikimedians, but it gives me a short list of people to talk to as well. So I have at least 2 who have said that they will chat to me. So hopefully I'll be lining them up soon. And also this conversation, I think I'll have to invite everybody else who's been involved in this onto the podcast as well to chat about what we've, do a little slice of what we've been doing. So hopefully within the next month or 2, we'll have that third season coming out. They're always sets of 10. We tend to take a little bit of a break. So they come out fortnightly. So over 20 weeks, you'll get the set of 10. We'll take another little break probably over the summer, and then we'll be back again in the autumn. So again, I'm very findable on the internet. There are not many Rebecca O'Neills. There's a footballer in New Zealand, but we're easy to tell apart. So there's not a lot of confusion there. But if there's somebody in your community, or you think the work that you're doing, or somebody that you think that I should definitely be talking to, my email and my ear is always open.
Thank you. And we're expecting the next 10 to go live. And whenever they do, please also hint us so we could spread the word and also keep tabs. Thank you so much for giving us the schedule for your respective podcast episodes. And then the next question is, I mentioned the events in Ukraine at the beginning of this session, and wanted to get your thoughts on the importance of platforms such as this during the crisis. What are the importance, or why is maybe a podcast necessary in, let's say, in time of war, and in a time where perhaps there are many details or information flying up and about? Why is it important to have such podcasting platforms? You can start, Betty.
Okay, so I mean, it's a very tricky situation in Ukraine, as we all know. And I doubt if at this point, if anybody's even thinking about listening to podcasts. But I guess maybe, you know, I mean, I know podcasters who are based in Ukraine who can't record because of what is going on, because they can't even stay at one place. So as a result, you know, their work has been interrupted. And my heart really goes out to them. And I hope this whole thing, you know, it's figured out quickly so that the people of Ukraine can get back to their lives. But I guess the importance of podcasts will be, it's pretty much on the go. Wherever you find internet, you know, if you go to wherever you listen to your podcast, maybe you can find something, you know, plug into your favorite podcast, and maybe get some, I guess, words of encouragement, something to pull you through these dark times that Ukrainians are experiencing. So I guess, you know, the on the go-ness of it, it's easy to access. So I hope that if they find any solace, or if they find any I guess peace in their favorite podcast, maybe this is the time to do that. But I doubt if, you know, this is really what will be on the list of things for them. But, you know, all the same, I really wish them all the best.
Thank you, Betty. But allow me to mention that some podcasts are actually thriving this very moment, especially those who are crazy enough to capture the right titles. I know that sometime in history of World War II, some people were maybe podcasting about what was happening around the various regions about the war. So perhaps the people listening might not majorly be Ukrainians, like you rightly mentioned. They have better things to worry about, their lives getting back to normal and not being shelled into the ground, for instance. Thank you for that answer, nonetheless, because I know that people could find solace in listening to voices, perhaps consoling them over the radio or over the speakers. Thank you so much.
Definitely.
Yolanda, Rebecca, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think it is a moment in which we all think about freedom of expression, and it is also one of the period in which we intensively think of the safety of also our contributors, the contributors of the open communities of Wikimedia projects. And it's true that audio and podcast remind us of radio, and the history of radio. It's been always the hope, the possibility of listening to news. And I think this is a good moment to maybe concentrate also on the advantage we have, on the freedom of expression that we have, because obviously it is a moment in which we see what can happen also to us, to all of us.
Okay, that's actually interesting with what we had happening some weeks ago, I guess, where they said anybody spreading false information in quotes, and some people felt they had a monopoly of what false information meant. So perhaps a platform like a podcast could really throw the actual happening and the right information out there. How about you, Rebecca? Do you have anything to add?
Well, I think the importance of documentation and of storytelling in these moments. There's many people from different parts of the world who would speak to. We were talking about kind of the importance of radio, but also I suppose the DIY nature of individual citizens being able to document what is actually happening to them to counter those narratives, the propaganda, the suppression of what's actually happening, and perhaps the manipulation of certain populations that we see around the world of the information that they are being allowed to see, and people being able to take it into their own hands and produce a counter narrative to that, I think is very important. And we see that in various points in more recent history, how important that kind of citizen documentation is. And I think perhaps, as kind of Betty was alluding to, right in this moment, there are more pressing things for them to get to safety, to protect their country, to fight off the invasion. But that going forward, the recordings perhaps that they have made, the documentation that they have created, will hopefully ensure, we always hope that, that we will learn from history. And that perhaps having that empowerment as individual citizens with handheld devices that a lot of us now have, that will mean that the manipulation of history won't be as easy in the future, and that the truth of what is happening and what is unfolding will be incontrovertible because of that.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Yolanda, I couldn't help but recognize an important factor you mentioned, which would lead me to the next question. If you don't mind giving your perspective on the Wikipedia's relevance in this very situation, please, you have the floor.
Well, I don't think in this period we're all, I think, very concerned about the practical situation. But as the Wikimedia project our role is to continue to do what we do. It is to continue to document the events, to cite sources, to provide information that is not disinformation, avoid fake news. So this is the major effort that Wikipedia and the Wikimedia project do. And obviously continuing to do it, assuring that we don't stop, that also our contributors are protected, they are safe, and also reminding to everyone also to protect their identity online. This is also a moment in which we need to think about it very seriously. So I think it might seem maybe a smaller part of a conflict. We see it as, obviously we are not in it's a form of support, of course, but it is important to continue to do what we've been assuring throughout the last 20 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much for throwing light on the relevance of Wikipedia and Wikimedia in the light of these conflicting times. And like Yolanda mentioned, please protect your identity online, especially if you're making contributions or utterances towards the recent happenings. Thank you so much, Betty Kankambaudu, Yolanda Pensa, and Rebecca O'Neill, for sharing your podcasting world with us today. Your journey, I can say, is nothing short of amazing as you continue in it. You ladies have been nothing short of amazing in your responses, as I believe our audience has been blessed by those responses. Hopefully, someone in the audience or from the audience will have a question or more for any of you. Now we move on to the Q&A session. So please, if you have any question for our special guests, uh, do well to put it in the comment section while we have them respond to the questions. Okay, someone from the audience suggested a tool. Check out lingualib.org. I think it's one of the podcasting tools. Thank you for that suggestion. It's safe to say that we carried the audience along for them to make him suggestions. And okay, the question I can see from this end is how well are your podcasts doing? Rebecca, you can go first. You have the donkey ears here.
I honestly, it is Fanula that keeps an eye on the stats. From what I know, from when we started, we were getting about 100 listens per episode, which I am reliably told is not doing too bad, is not too shabby. And as I said, I think we have benefited hugely from Wikimedians being very supportive. And being very generous in sharing and promoting the podcast to everybody. So I think we're on something like 2,000 listens across all 20 episodes, which is quite good if you divide it out across all of them over time. And people are finding it as well. Yeah.
Yes. How about you, Yolanda?
I really have no idea. I never checked, and I've been fighting for so many years about institutions that count their public because I think offering free beer is a very fast way of getting a lot of audience. So I'm not sure it is relevant, and I'm sorry I never counted and never checked. Also because it's my volunteer work, so I don't really care. Even if it was simply for me, that would be great.
Okay, that's a fair enough answer, but it's actually a lot of work being put in there, and if I have the means, I would help you check on your behalf.
I'll check.
And and so far, Rebecca, what is your favorite episode of the World According to Wikipedia podcast?
Oh, it's like choosing your favorite pet or your favorite child. You're not allowed to have a favorite.
Okay, let me
I will say,
rephrase. What is
yeah.
the episode that worked the best? Let me put it like that.
I suppose one of the ones that had quite lasting impact that I didn't necessarily expect was the conversation I had with Sandister. So when the Wikimedia of the Year 2021 was about to be announced, I had a chat with her about her experiences of being the Wikimedian of the Year and what that meant. And that has, I think, a lot of people outside of the movement and inside the movement didn't really think about what it was like, I suppose, to receive an honor like that and how it can come out like a bolt out of the blue. But also, I think people outside the movement, the fact that we actually do recognize each other as individuals, I think, is quite surprising for them. They didn't actually think that we would. They don't think. I think outside of the Wikimedia movement, they don't think of us as a community necessarily. I think they do think of us either as kind of this faceless monolith, or as these individuals, that again are in basements, tappa 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 and never talk to anybody, and that actually there is a huge warmth of community. I think is really surprising, and I think that it was nice to, we sometimes forget that because we're part of it and we get to enjoy it, but to share an element of that with everyone was wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That really cracked me up when you said the thing that just some individuals in their basements. Somebody I met last year called us ghost workers, and it couldn't have been funnier. That was very funny, and of course that's how they actually see us. But it's interesting when such people get to learn what we do and become integrated into what we do. And in my books, Rebecca, the episode with Sandista is the best episode. Thank you. Um, that's an interesting episode, knowing what she felt or how she received being chosen as the Wikipedian of the year. And one more question from here says, "What things did you wish your podcasting self knew about podcasting before you started?" Betty, you could go first.
I in this instance, I was so excited to get into broadcasting that I actually didn't have any expectation. My expectation was just to do well and to do it well. So I wouldn't say I had any expectations, but I guess, you know, particularly as a woman, when you put yourself out there to have an opinion, you know, to speak on national issues, to speak on topics, it's a risk. It's a risk. And sometimes in some jurisdictions, it can be a very dangerous risk. But I guess I've been lucky to be in a space where it's not a dangerous risk, you know, apart from the fact that sometimes you will be bullied online. Sometimes people will still feel that you are not the smartest person. You're not sharing the smartest of opinions. You're not, you know, asking the smartest of questions. You get that. But aside that, you know, that really, at this point, that really, it doesn't get to me. It really doesn't get to me because, you know, there are certain people who always have something negative to say about whatever it is you do. So I take the good, and then, you know, the ones that I feel is just coming from a place of I don't know where. I just leave those as they are. But yeah, but it's been an exciting journey so far. And I won't really change any parts of it.
Interesting answer. Thank you, Betsy. The experience so far must have been interesting enough for you not to want to edit out any aspect of it. And how about you, Yolanda?
Well, in this work, I'm invisible because I'm behind the scene. So I don't appear. My voice doesn't appear. I don't appear. My name is really behind the scene as an editor of it. So I liked, just to quote Betty, I think it's a celebration. At the end, for me, what I found in this experience is really celebrating exceptional people, or people that I trust are exceptional. Often journalists need to portray the reality, need to portray the current event. I have the privilege to decide who I want to meet, and to meet people that can actually allow us to imagine things that can go in a different way, so that they can be an inspiration, being somebody that can really make a change. And I think I interviewed also Magnus Manske, who is a very active component of our community. He was one of the ICT person, the developer that software developer that contributed so widely to the wiki, how it is today. And he's funny because his interview, he's such a modest and somehow whispering contribution, and he's a rock star in reality. And I thought it was nice to see how you find people that are so different, so they can express themselves in such a different way, also their work and their protagonism, their ego. So it is a wonderful experience to celebrate all those people.
Beautiful. Listening to you describe the experience so far, it's. I mean, we might have to make a session for you to describe this because it's something you've done so far with so much passion, and the fact that you meet different kind of people over time is something I would say you enjoy a lot. Thank you so much, Yolanda. And for you, Rebecca, what can you say?
I suppose one of the things I found so surprising is how many of my friends actually listen to the podcast. I kind of thought that they'd be tired of listening to me, especially listening to me talk about Wikipedia stuff. They'd be like, you know what, change the track, change the record. But I suppose, you know, enthusiasm is probably slightly infectious, and there is always kind of a sense of curiosity around Wikipedia and things like that. So people are just curious and interested, and your friends will weigh in behind you. So bend the arm of your brothers and sisters and a couple of friends, and you'll have 6 listens before you know it, and you can just go from there. That's probably what I'd say.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for that. And I wish to thank you, special guests, for addressing these questions. And thank you, everyone who brought up the questions that were asked, and you've succeeded in helping us get the remaining clarities out of our special guests, I would say. And greater thanks once again to our special guests who have adequately and patiently given the responses to these questions asked. We now move to the news items for today. With me today is Betty Kankan Baudu to give the news updates. Hello, Betty. I
Hello.
wish to especially thank you for accepting to do this. This
It's a
means a
pleasure.
lot. Thank you. And first on the news item is to let you know that Wiki Loves Africa 2022 themed Home and Habitat closes on 15th April. Please get your photographs and entries in ASAP. Over to you, Betty.
Wiki Loves Women 2022 ISA tool campaign. Tell us about Hair is on until the end of March, when prizes while adding descriptions to images depicting women in the architectural field.
Wiki Loves Women Inspiring Open podcast has launched, like you rightly heard during the session. Listen to the episode 1 as Annie Akwe shares tools that made her successful.
And the Hackathon Committee is thrilled to announce the 2022 Global Wikimedia Hackathon online from 20 to 22nd of May 2022. There will be grants available to support local in-person meetups around the world. You can find more information about this on Wiki Africa, our newsroom.
And Wikimania will take place this year from August 11th to 14th. The conference will be virtual with support offered for local gatherings and events. Your thoughts and suggestions for the 2022 Wikimania can be made via a survey that you can access on the Wiki Africa Hour news page.
And the WikiGap Challenge is open. Everyone is invited to take part. Deadline is 8th May 2022.
The education team at the Wikimedia Foundation wants your insight into the perceptions of Wikipedia by the academic faculties in higher education. Feedback links are at the Wiki Africa Hour newsroom.
Also, save the date for the virtual launch of Wiki for Human Rights 2022. It takes place on April 14th, 2022.
The campaigns team at the Wikimedia Foundation is seeking input on an event registration system for Wiki events. Head to the Wiki Africa Hour newsroom for a link to check out the system.
Also, don't forget to join the Leadership Development Working Group. The application deadline is the 10th of April.
And lastly, the Wiki Loves Monuments 2022 office hours start from Sunday, 27th March at 1500 UTC. That's 3 p.m. UTC. This week's focus is on the possibilities of using Wikidata during the Wiki Loves Monuments. You need to register. You know where to find the link. Our Wiki Africa, our newsroom. You can view all the news updates in the Wiki Africa, our newsroom, and take the actions on the items that require actions. Today, we have seen just a cross section of amazing women and their awesome initiatives propelled through different podcasts. Certainly, we can all agree that if we don't break the bias, awesome initiatives such as these could easily elude us while we are trying to dictate to one gender or the other what is obtainable and what is not. From inspiring open to Scuola di pensiero to The World According to Wikipedia. We have seen the thought process, the amazing flair put in these podcasts by these wonderful ladies. As you go about the rest of your life, take a cue from them and continue to break the bias. Thank you, Betty Kankam Baudu, Yolanda Pensa, and Rebecca O'Neill for being an inspiration to us all. And thank you for making our time to honor our invitation. On behalf of the Wiki in Africa team, we thank everyone for showing up. We also want to use this opportunity to invite anybody who needs to use our StreamYard platform for events to reach out to us, as we are more than willing to have people use it. I remain your host, Ceslos Obunaya, and I wish you a happy weekend. See you next time on episode 12, where, drum rolls, we will engage Mariana Iskander, the new CEO of Wikimedia Foundation. Don't miss it. Remember to subscribe to the Wiki in Africa YouTube channel to keep tabs on all past and upcoming episodes. Thank you. Have a good evening from this side.
This episode of Wiki Africa Hour was hosted by Ceslas Obanaya. Let us know what topics you want to discuss and join us next month on the same channels. Subscribe to the Wiki in Africa YouTube channel and follow Wiki Africa on social media.